And finally, we're going to continue to make border security, border integrity and security a top priority. That means effectively managing the arrival of regular migrants and asylum seekers.
50,000. That is how many Syrian refugees Canada might have lost track of. According to Post Media News, the Canadian Immigration Department hasn't produced a report on these refugees in nearly 2 years. The government originally planned to monitor their education, jobs, and social assistance.
Border integrity and security, a top priority.
Now to what brought Trudeau to Toronto today to meet with Ontario's new Premier, Doug Ford, for the first time since the provincial election. Clashes were expected over climate policy as the two are deeply divided on the issue. But then, moments before the closed-door talks, the Ontario PC government set the stage for another fight by publicly denouncing Ottawa's handling of asylum seekers. So how did the meeting play out? The CBC's Mike Crowley was on the scene and joins us now from Queen's Park. Hey, Mike, thanks for being with us. So what happened?
Well, Vashi, this issue of immigration, illegal immigration, asylum seekers really dominated the meeting somewhat unexpectedly. It kind of got kicked off by this statement that was put out just before the Prime Minister arrived for his meeting. The tone of it from the Premier Doug Ford's spokesperson saying that the federal government encouraged illegal border crossers to come into our country. This has resulted in a housing crisis and threats to the services that Ontario families depend on. So naturally, this was one of the questions to ask the Prime Minister as soon as he came out of the meeting. He said that he and Premier Doug Ford agreed that it would be good for their officials to sit down and talk about this issue. But he says that he tried to reassure the Premier that the asylum seeker system is separate from the immigration system. Take a listen.
It didn't seem to me that the Premier was quite as aware of our international obligations to the UN Convention on Refugees as he might have been. So I spent a little time explaining how the asylum-seeking system works and how our system is supposed to operate.
And the Prime Minister says he gave those assurances to Premier Ford that it's important that the immigration system and the asylum system is working actively. Okay, Vashi?
So what is the Ford government saying in response to all of that?
The minister who's responsible for immigration, Lisa MacLeod, she came out after Cabinet, so this was after the meeting ended, and she had some fairly strong words for the Prime Minister, basically saying that if the Trudeau government wants to bring people into the country, they need to be sure that they are paid for.
The reality is we've got a Prime Minister who's created a problem with 28,000 people who illegally crossed the border into Canada and who has really only sent a few people back, but at the same time has seen a massive pressure on the largest city in the country, here in Toronto.
Now, the Mayor of Toronto has indicated that the cost to the city is somewhere in the neighborhood of $75 million. But I asked Minister MacLeod, how significant is this thing that she's calling a crisis? She said there's maybe 800 people that have come into Ontario that she would class as illegal border crossers. She says that she is looking into the cost that this is having on Ontario's social assistance system and the health system. Vashi?
Thanks, Mike. So what will the federal government do now? Pony up the cash for Ontario's refugees or try to convince the PC government that this is a shared responsibility? Joining me now is the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, Ahmed Hussen. Hi, Minister Hussen. Thanks for being with us again. We just heard the Prime Minister suggest that Premier Ford doesn't completely understand Canada's international obligations when it comes to asylum seekers. What does that mean?
First of all, it's important to note that, as the Prime Minister has stated, that it is really important to understand that Canadians expect all levels of government to work together on issues. We may not agree on everything, but we are expected to work together on issues that face our country. On the issue of housing, it's a shared responsibility. On the issue of immigration, we have a great immigration system in this country. Asylum seekers we have international obligations as well as domestic laws to apply when it comes to asylum seekers. These are not optional issues. This is the law, that we can't just opt out of. And so once someone is on Canadian soil and they claim asylum, we have international obligations to provide them due process to make sure that their claims are at least heard. Once they're here, the provision of housing is a shared responsibility. We understand the pressures that provinces have faced with respect to this issue, even though in the last number of months the numbers have been dropping and the numbers are promising. The federal government has stepped up. We have invested more than $173 million in budget 2018 for more border security operations as well as faster processing of refugee claims. In addition to that, we have made an initial allocation of $50 million in recognition of the pressures that Quebec, Ontario, and Manitoba have faced with respect to this issue. But we have to work together. And as we have worked very closely with Quebec, we also need Ontario to be part of the mix.
But what Ontario, I think what Premier Ford's government is saying today is, okay, fine, housing is a shared responsibility, but they're saying the reason there is this influx of asylum seekers that they have to deal with is because of the federal government. And because, you know, they're even going so far as to say it's because of that tweet sent out by the Prime Minister that said, to those fleeing persecution, war, and terror, Canadians will welcome you regardless of your faith. So they're saying, you created this problem, you have to pay for it. Do they have a point?
I think it's important to note that Canada is a signatory to the Geneva Conventions when it comes to asylum seekers. We have an asylum system that makes sure that once someone is on Canadian soil, we have a legal obligation. It's the law. It's not an option. It's the law that we have to, at the very minimum, allow them a fair hearing to make their claim. Now, if they do not require Canada's protection, if they're not genuine refugees, then they get to be removed from Canada.
Except fewer than 1% of the 28,000 people who have crossed illegally into this country have actually been removed.
The issue is that we have to give due process. These are not optional things. They are international obligations that we have signed on to as a country. Having said that, Canadians expect all levels of government to work together on a broad number of issues, including this one. We recognize the pressures that this has created on cities and provinces. And I'll give you an example of the model that we're working on. Quebec and Canada have had a good model to work together on with respect to the identification of temporary housing sites and making sure that there's an orderly system in place. The fact of the matter is some people will find themselves in Ontario, and we need Ontario to be at the table to work together to make sure that we have a system in place to relieve pressure from Toronto. Minister MacLeod has been on the record as stating that she's concerned about the pressure that this has created on the temporary housing sites in Toronto. Well, one of the ways to do that is one of the ways to relieve that pressure is for Ontario to work with the federal government and Toronto to establish a system where we identify temporary housing sites outside of Toronto, the same way that we're doing with Quebec. And we're ready to play our role. We've increased our capacity at the border. We're making the necessary investments in the refugee determination process to speed up decisions. And we're there with the provinces to make sure we help them with these extraordinary pressures.
But on that issue, there is a very tangible manifestation of that in Toronto right now. The shelters there are made up, right now 40% of them are made up of, are filled with refugees and asylum claimants. 800 of those people, many of whom are children, will need shelter after August 9th when 2 college dormitories need to actually be used for school again. We had the mayor on last week, and he was saying he's asked the federal government for help. Will you help them?
Absolutely, and we have been. I have been in touch with Mayor. I've been in touch with Mayor Tory on numerous occasions. We're working very closely together. I understand the pressures that they're facing. We've already made an allocation of $50 million. We are committed to flowing that money before the end of this month.
Will that make the difference? Will that allow Toronto to move those refugees out of those dormitories?
It's part of the. It's part of the solution, absolutely. But in addition to that, we are working with Quebec, but we also need to work with Ontario to set up a triage system so that cities like Toronto and Montreal do not face the disproportionate pressure that they're facing.
Is that possible, though? I ask you because with what Mr. Premier Ford said today, is that even possible? How can you work together when he says he doesn't want anything to do?
Well, ideally, it is possible Well, we have two choices. We either have a situation where, for example, with the work that we're doing with Quebec, where a province is able to identify the necessary sites, that we're able to share information, that we're able to coordinate our responses and have an orderly process while these asylum seekers wait for their hearings, which we're speeding up by making the necessary investments in the IRB, or we don't have that coordination and we have a less orderly situation, which I don't believe Ontario also would like. So Toronto and the Government of Canada is on the same page on this. We're working together. The federal government has stepped forward, not only with financial resources, but with more capacity at the border, but also with faster processing. But we need Ontario to be part of the solution, and that is what Canadians expect of us.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thanks a lot for your time, Minister Houssin.
Thank you very much.
Former drama teacher turned Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has his own illegal immigration crisis north of the border. Border crossers are clogging the asylum system in Canada and flooding the homeless shelters. So the Canadian government has a new solution to all of this: move hundreds of immigrants into hotels where they will live at public expense. Stephen Ledrew is a former president of the Liberal Party of Canada, and he joins us tonight for an update on all that. Stephen, thanks a lot for coming on. So Canadians are famously good-humored and tolerant and sort of, I would say, a little bit passive maybe. But are they for this? Is anyone saying anything? Well, you're not passive. And we're glad to have you. I don't mean to. I love Canada. I'm not attacking Canada. But like, what do they think of this?
Come on up for a holiday. We'll give you a free hotel room. First of all, the 800, Tucker, are just those who are now in school classrooms and in school dormitories, and they have to be cleared out in order for the classes to come back towards the end of August. So those 800 are going to hotels. But that's only the thin edge of the wedge on this one, because last year we had over 20,000 illegal asylum seekers. This year, by the end of May, I think we had over 5,000. So there's thousands and thousands. And the mayors, particularly John Tory, the mayor of the city of Toronto, are saying we can no longer accommodate anybody. So the 800 going into hotel rooms, I hope it's not the Four Seasons or the Ritz, but that is just a small number of them. So you ask about Canadians and how they're responding. Canadians are very generous. We have an empty country up here. We could take a lot of people here, but on the other hand, they don't like to see their dollars being wasted. So it comes around to the fact that these people seeking asylum, Tucker, and you know this, they aren't coming into the regular border places where they are processed. They are walking across, and the government of Canada could stop that with just a signature on a piece of paper. They could stop that for 3 months at least. But they haven't done that. So Canadians are getting upset about this. On the other hand, they're also looking to the States and saying, well, why are all these people in the States and they're coming to Canada? Why aren't they staying in the States? They aren't being kicked out of the States. So that's a question for your president.
Maybe it's because, maybe because Canada has more generous benefits and Canadians are even more guilty than Americans.
Well, it's a heck of a lot colder.
And feel, yeah, it is. It's much colder. So your prime minister, who I don't think really gets the credit he deserves for being a buffoon, no offense, is basically telling Canadians they're not allowed to complain about this. You're a bad person if you're against this, I think is his position.
Well, he's saying that on a lot of matters. I mean, he's been singing the same tune since he's been in office, talking about, gender equality and all kinds of stuff. He's had a lot of failures over the last year, and people are starting to, he's starting to wear thin. So I don't think the Tories, we're having a campaign, we're going to have an election, Tucker, in 14 months. They haven't started saying yet, build the wall and make President Trump pay, as he's saying with Mexico. But it could come down to something like that, because Trudeau is, in fact, saying not only on pipelines. I mean, we paid one of your Texas companies $4.5 billion, with a B, billion dollars. That may not be that much in the States, and Canada is a lot of money. We paid them a pipeline, that much for a pipeline out west, because we couldn't get them to agree with all the terms of it, and all kinds of other protesters. I mean, he is in trouble.
I meant to thank you for that, by the way. Stephen, we're out of time, but I just want to thank you for injecting that much into the American economy. It's great to see you, Stephen Ledrew from Canada.
Good chatting as always.
See ya.
Trudeau wants to put up yet another batch of migrants in Canadian hotels. Today I'm bringing you the first installment of our shocking investigation into what happened in the past when Liberals turned Canadian hotels into makeshift refugee camps. 800 illegal asylum seekers are currently being housed in Toronto area university dorms, but those dorms are being cleared out to make way for incoming university students. Now, the migrants aren't being cleared out to receive jobs and permanent housing that they would pay for. Oh no, friends. They're being cleared out and moved into area hotels, all at your expense. And I suspect those university dorm rooms are not going to be ready for Canadian students by the time they need them to be ready at the end of this summer. And the reason I say that is because I have a stack of access to information documents that detail what happened when Syrian migrants were housed in hotels as a stopgap measure when Justin Trudeau flooded Canada's refugee system with 50,000 Syrian migrants, all to keep a campaign promise. Now, this has been a huge investigation for us. I'm going to show you over the course of this week and next what I discovered about the physical destruction done to the hotels by the migrants. I'm also going to show you how the migrants are alleged to have treated the hotel staff, including female housekeeping staff. I'm going to show you how the migrants treated their own kids, including not monitoring, taking care of, or really caring about the bad behavior of their children at all. I'm going to show you some of the ungrateful attitudes these migrants held toward us, their host country, and our generosity. And lastly, I'm going to show you how the federal government tried to handle this situation. I'll give you a bit of a teaser. Part of it involves planting fake news. Today, we're going to get into some of the actual physical damage done by these migrants to the hotels who contracted with the federal government to house them in their early days in the country. I've got the emails the hotel management sent to their contacts at the government detailing, well, the mayhem really that was unfolding in their hotels. And I also have the internal government documents where the government bureaucrats discuss what is happening at the hotels. Let's get right into this. There's so much. This is an email from a hotel manager, and he says this all happened in the 2 nights that the Syrians were first there. I'm going to skip over some other things in the email because I promise I'll include it in another story, because today I'm just talking about the physical destruction that happened to nice hotels that we as Canadian taxpayers are now on the hook for. The email reads, "Good morning. This is a challenging electronic message to write. However, it is essential to inform you of the incidences that transpired here with this group. Fire caused in one of our guest rooms. Occupant tried to dry clothes in the heater. This caused fire to the heater and part of the carpet in the room. Pillows missing from rooms. In many rooms, guest directories, Bibles, telephone books, and any other paper promotional materials have been destroyed and left in guest rooms." They destroyed the Bibles, and something tells me this wasn't just incidental. Anyway, it goes on. All attraction pamphlets in the lobby have been pulled out, destroyed, and left on the floor. The manager even suggests here that the federal government should be providing firm instructions for refugees for respect of all foreign properties, written for each in their own language. Another hotel manager complains that the refugees are staying for longer than the 4 days the hotel initially contracted with the federal government for, and now the refugees are treating the hotel as their home. This manager says the children are running through the hotel, causing damage to the pool, and the hotel has had to shut down the pool twice for repair or cleaning, and that manager estimates the damage to the hotel is over $5,000. And this manager, though, still has patience with the federal government, but the next one I'm going to show you, well, he's all out of caring. This manager wrote to a contact at the federal government. Again, I'm going to skip over some things in the email that I'll tell you about in a subsequent story. But these are just some of the concerns from this one hotel manager. The manager complains that the refugees are urinating in the lobby area. The manager says the rooms are marked with pens, and if they cannot clean it off, it will cost $500 to re-wallpaper each room. The manager complains of broken furniture and stained or damaged sheets, which have to be thrown away. The manager says that a regular guest would be fined $250 for the damage to just the sheets alone. This hotel also complains of yet another near fire being started, right here in this email. The morning maintenance discovered a room with a metal luggage rack with wet clothes placed over an electric heater. If these people get electrocuted or cause a fire, will the government be paying for the damages? That same manager goes on to say that after all of the damages and labor costs due to the extra cleaning required, it's almost not even worth having the account because no one is paying for the damages, not to mention all the added stress caused by some of the, and then it's redacted. And this is an internal government document listing behaviors that are happening at a hotel that houses Syrian refugees. And the document explicitly points out the destruction of Bibles, right here. Bibles being colored in and destroyed. Now, this is becoming a bit of a theme, with at least 2 separate hotels now complaining that the Bibles are being destroyed by refugees. In this internal document, the government is aware that a hotel housing 124 Syrians is reporting a theft of microwaves, towels, shampoo, toilet paper, tissues, and pillows. The hotel says that there has been damage to towels and mattresses and broken furniture, and now garbage is being stuffed into heating units, causing a fire hazard. Here on page 261, an internal government communication says that the migrants clogged a toilet due to flushing food packaging. The migrants were invoiced $100 for a plumber, but then they also broke a window screen for which they have not been billed. The same government communication says that the government was now notified that head lice have been found on the families and their clothes and clotheslines have been laundered, and they've been provided special treatment shampoo. And at the same time, the government was also notified that bed bugs have been found and that they have spread to the rest of the hotel. In this internal government document, a hotel is reporting that the hotel has been, quote unquote, completely destroyed in terms of damage to rooms and common areas, with examples include baseboard heating systems being pulled from the walls, broken sink tops, clogged toilets, broken water valves on toilets, smoking in the rooms, and even holes punched in the wall of the child care room. As a result, the hotel had to be completely closed to non-Syrian refugee guests. Now, that's just some of the physical destruction one batch of migrants did to a few hotels contracted by the federal government. It's outrageous. No doubt Canadian taxpayers are on the hook for every penny of the damage incurred then. And no doubt there will be damage done to these Toronto area dorm rooms as these new migrants move into their new hotel homes. Tomorrow, I'm bringing you the second installment of my investigation into refugees being placed into Canadian hotels. I'm going to detail the treatment of the staff by the Syrians. For the Rebel.Media, I'm Sheila Gunn-Reid.